Hey everyone. It's been a bit, hasn't it? Don't worry, that Fallout New Vegas, California compliance run is in the works, along with all the other stuff I talked about, but it's gonna take a while since on top of revising the rules for that run, I'm in the middle of a cross-country move. Don't worry though, I've had something planned for this occasion to hold us over till I can get into those. It's time for Halloween in July! In case you're new here, every year I spend most of my background hours making a bunch of videos on the side so that come July we have a marathon of spooky games and every video gets a brand new cooking segment. And to celebrate this season of spookies, I slashed the yearly rate of my Patreon as low as they will let me discount it. And to further sweeten that deal, everyone who pledges yearly gets one of these iron-on anti-content patches I make myself as a free gift. And anyone who pledges yearly at the $5 recipe tier or higher gets their own patron apron, just like the one I wear as a thank you gift. Which yes, I also make those myself because screw all those fulfillment companies. Now that I've got everyone up to speed, let's go over the theme for this year. Mascot Horror. Yes, this was another bit that I have taken way too far. I think I have a problem when it comes to that. Mascot Horror is now a well-established subgenre of horror games, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that these games tend to have a bit of a reputation on top of their tropes. You know what's up. Quickly, sometimes sloppily produced games, overemphasis on vague in-game story as a vehicle to sell merch that acts as secondary sources of lore, and despite having a lot of generally adult themes and things that would make a movie rated R as you do in a horror game, there's a lot of stuff in the design and the creation of these games that heavily implies that they're, well, implicitly meant to entice children. In short, if you see characters from a game as a bootleg plushie at a mall kiosk, they're most likely from a Mascot Horror game. Now, that's not exactly the best reputation for these games, and frankly, it casts quite the shadow over them. So that'd make it hard to give any of them a fair shot. So we're going to do something special. We're going to go into each of these games with what's called the beginner's mindset. That means for our sake, we are not going to have any preconceptions about these games as I play them. And on top of that, we are only going to judge these games for themselves. No outside lorecraft or supplementary material. We're going to try and give these games as fair as a shot as possible. The first game we're going to take a look at is, the Hello Neighbor series. Man, I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm just gonna tell you now that while this was the first Halloween in July video I attempted to start right at the beginning of January, it took me all the way until the very end of April to finish this video, and I did 2 whole other videos just to put off finishing these games, or finishing a game. The Hello Neighbor series has you following various protagonists who are investigating their weird neighbor across the street who is definitely up to something. Investigation means a whole lot of B&E and the neighbor having the patience of a saint with you. There's also some pretty wild architecture going on here, which I'm fairly certain an HOA would not approve. Let's start with the first game of the series, Hello Neighbor. Well, fuck it, this game is a huge mess, and yes, I know what the fans of the series are going to say, and trust me, we will get towards that later in the video, but for now, remember that we're just taking these games as is, with no outside material or preconceptions. For now, we'll say that this game is horribly broken at best and outright unfinished and unplayable in a few crucial areas. Let's start with the physics, which for a second before I did literally anything in this game, I was excited about the prospect of stacking boxes to get into areas, all while sneaking around this house where a guy's trying to find me. Too bad that attempting to stack boxes will usually result in physics getting weird, with the best case scenario being the boxes decide to jump away from you as soon as you try to make contact with them, and the likely scenario being that the boxes will launch you into space the second you try to jump onto them, with this being severe enough to launch you out of the map and kill you outright, resulting in the game crashing when you try to spawn back in. It's a shame that a lot of what you'll be needing to do is sneak around the house, and that involves physics such as stacking things or climbing onto things to get to places, or throwing things to knock over other things to activate things. So much of this game, especially the early game, is just wrestling with the physics and you're jumping and hoping to God that things freak out in a way that lets you progress. Oh yeah, and while you're doing all that, you're going to have to contend with the mascot of this Mascot Horror game, the neighbor. Yes, I know he has a name, but it isn't revealed anywhere in this game, so no, we're not using it for now. I've played a lot of sneaky games before, and I've dealt with some pretty keen-eyed enemies in my time, but the neighbor is on a whole different level. He will see you from across the map and through several small openings in the house, and he will make a beeline for you. He moves exactly as fast as you do, and thanks to his near wall hacks level of vision, you can't really juke him and hide, but instead have to run all the way to the property line of your house that forces him to disengage. The neighbor's pattern is that he doesn't seem to have one, and will just move from one random action to another, and each thing he does is far too short of a duration for you to have any meaningful window of opportunity to move, including distractions you make to try and get him away from where you need to go. In order to complete objectives, you're going to need to find paths where the neighbor cannot possibly see you, or take advantage of when he wanders off to go do something that is at the opposite side of the house of the thing that you need to do, and pray you can wrestle with the physics fast enough to get it done. This gets a little easier as the house starts getting comically large because the neighbor can't be everywhere at once, and the distance between you and the neighbor gets bigger and bigger, meaning you have more time to try and do things, or even if you're extremely lucky, you just can't path to a certain place, so you've got safe zones. That doesn't make it any less mind-melting that you have to contend with an adversary that seemingly has an infinite range of vision and can see you through the slightest opening in walls. Most of this game's quote-unquote stealth is you just brute forcing your way through objectives by trying to get to an area, running back to your front yard to reset the neighbor's aggression when he inevitably sees you through 3 windows and 2 pieces of furniture he probably shouldn't have been able to see you through, and then trying again until it works. But what about those objectives? What are they? They are the most lunarly inclined of moon logic BS. Like, I'm actively trying not to be mean here, but I just can't find nice things to say about this game. The objectives are often things that you cannot possibly be expected to intuit, as there's effectively no telegraphing of what you're supposed to be doing in most of these puzzles, especially early on, aside from, oh, I need to find a key to get into thing, and the rest is banging your head against the wall, trying to figure out what puzzle you're supposed to be doing and which things you will need to do in order to make things happen. Would you know that you need to move this exact picture on this wall where there's like 20 pictures to open a pathway to the upper levels of the Franken's house, where there's hundreds of pictures all over the damn house and only turning this one does anything? Frankly, this is walkthrough bait. And walkthrough bait on a level that would make even the King's Quest adventure games go, hey, that's a little much, man. Maybe give the player a chance to figure it out on their own. Except for something that we'll talk about in just a sec. By the way, you're doing all this while the neighbor's running around with his borderline wall hacks vision. On top of all of this, there's just a bunch of little quality of life things that aren't in the game. The first and most obvious one that you're likely already have noticed is that most held items take up a massive amount of your screen, making it very hard to aim with them when you're trying to throw them, let alone see where you are going when you're holding something. Also, the musical stings are blatantly saying, you are supposed to be scared now, which ironically prevents that from happening because the neighbor is never going to be able to get the drop on you because the music is essentially a cowbell for him. Even if you can't see the neighbor, you will always know where he is thanks to the musical stings. And finally, since I'm not going to list out every stupid nitpick possible because that would just be outright petty, the gadgets you get only work when the game feels like they should. You can't use the magnet to grab this wrench through the window, however later on you can use it to grab other things. You have to do the elaborate series of tasks to get to the tool shed or whatever this place is supposed to be to grab this particular item. However, once you get past that, you can just use it on whatever. I just don't understand it. And now to say the obvious, this game is blatantly unfinished. But no, this wasn't dumped on Steam at 1.0 and then developer Dynamic Pixel swanned off to wherever the perpetual early access developers go. Not at all. In fact, they supported Hello Neighbor for 2 years with patches and mod support and even a few crossover promos like Hello Bendy. A lot of these patches even added whole new cutscenes and reworked puzzles. Funny enough, these patches also say that things like the shaders and the physics were improved, which terrifies me as to what they were like on launch. And in spite of all of this, the neighbor still acts like he has God vision and just generally very rudimentary detection. Attempting to stack boxes can still send you to the Shadow Realm, and there is hardly a scrap of signposting anywhere, and you are expected to either brute force or walk through your way through most of these puzzles. And this brings us all to the big moment. I will 100% admit that I quit out of this game towards the end without actually making it to the credits. In spite of all these patches, there are frankly some inexcusable things that were left in, maybe even on purpose, but I do not want to assume malice. However, it puzzles me that certain things were never attended to over the course of the 14 to 15 patches this game got. I don't know if this patch on release day was a day one patch or just the game itself releasing. Here's what went down for me. I was struggling to get through all the jank of the moon logic of this game as best I could, but I had already succumbed to finding actually a couple walkthroughs just to try and get to the end of this. Now the one I was currently using was a written walkthrough, and it said in Act 3 that when I got to this gated off button, I was supposed to ignore the huge crate of basketballs in the next room and use a nearby shoe to throw the switch to get the key. Now I thought this meant I was supposed to throw the shoe at the button through the grate because maybe its hitbox is smaller and therefore the wonky collision wouldn't affect it as badly and I'd be able to hit the button easier. That didn't work. Okay, I'll do it the developer intended way. I used every last basketball to try and hit this button to no avail. I used my magnet thing to try and retrieve metallic objects like alarm clocks so I can keep throwing them, and even one of the keys later in the game, but I could not finagle any object to hit this button on the edge of the wall to open the glass barrier that would allow me to throw a switch to remove a smaller grate that would allow me to grab the red key to open a lock that does something. I don't know. Turns out I read the guide wrong. After rereading the walkthrough and then finding a video guide from about a year ago, I realized I was supposed to deliberately exploit the terrible collision in physics in Hello Neighbor to use the shoe to clip through the glass covering the lever and get access to the key that way, skipping hitting the button through the grate entirely. It turns out the button is effectively impossible to hit by throwing things at it. And in spite of all this patching and post-launch support, they never bothered to so much as change the position of the button onto like perhaps the opposite wall of where you're throwing, or maybe alter the grading a bit so that it would be feasible to throw something and hit it. They certainly knew about this issue, otherwise why would they plop several dozen basketballs into the next room on top of all the things you were supposed to initially try throwing at it in the current room? At this point I tap out, I'm done. I closed the game and never booted it up again. If Markiplier gets to tap out, I feel I have the right to tap out too. I make no exaggeration when I say this briefly broke my will to play video games. I started Hello Neighbor 2, and after an hour of realizing I was just wandering around the overworld and not actually playing, I took a break from video games. I went to MagFest, where normally I'm really into it, but this time around I had no will to try out any of the cool indie games they have in the showcase, including the cool giant hat game. I regret not trying the hat game. I got back from MagFest, and in the week between MagFest and going on a big road trip to help my wife go to job interviews, I couldn't even find the will to boot up my Switch in the hotels and grind Pokemon raids. And finally, after a month and change of doing literally anything else, I decided to give video games a chance and start that Fallout 4 challenge run again. This isn't like the BS clickbait, blank game literally broke me. Hello Neighbor quite literally broke my will to play video games, which is pretty impressive considering some of the trash I've slugged it out with. Another example of a blatantly unfinished game that's a meme on this channel is Abermore, a game which the developers confirmed in the comments of my video was unfinished, and it was all they could do to get it on Steam and then patch in the bare minimum of things that Steam requires so they don't delist it. I'll play Abermore 100 more times before I boot up Hello Neighbor again. We're gonna do fried mushrooms today because I'm feeling some greasy snack food. Also, they're very simple to do. Funny story, when I was going to offload my footage of this cooking segment onto my computer, there was already a fried mushrooms folder. Turns out I had tried filming these before, but I never ended up using that one. That happens a lot more than you'd think. I film a cooking segment and then either there's no video where it really fits, or I just don't think what I made was worth showing, so it goes on the shelf. I got a bunch of these that might never see the light of day. This time around, I think we'll have a good time. First, we're gonna prep the mushrooms. Nothing too crazy here. Now, I know a lot of folks say not to get your mushrooms wet, but we're not dealing with fancy mushrooms from fancy places here. We got the grocery store stuff. We're just gonna lightly rinse these and apply just enough pressure with our fingers to get any bits of dirt off them, and then let the bulk of the water drip off in a colander while we get the rest. Now, two things are gonna be happening while we're doing this. One, we're making a note to not buy the largest mushrooms in the store. These guys are smaller than other packs of mushrooms we could get, and that's gonna help with frying them. Big mushrooms are great when you're slicing them up for burgers, but when we're deep frying, the extra size can be a problem. Two, While we're not going to remove them all, any mushroom stem that's overly long is gotta go. This is gonna make it easier to turn the mushrooms over when they're frying. Once we've rinsed them off, we're gonna place them on a paper towel lined tray for the rest of the water to drip off, and then we're gonna make the batter. The batter is also a very simple affair. It's literally 3 ingredients: flour, adult juice, and a bit of salt. If you can't or won't use adult juice, beef broth or chicken broth or basically any broth will do. Pour your adult juice into a mixing bowl and then sift in your flour 1 cup at a time. Whisk your flour into your adult juice until it's fully incorporated, and then add the next one and repeat until you've got a thick batter. Add in a bit of salt before the final stirring and it's good to go. Time to batter the shroomies. Now, I was looking at other people's recipes for these just to see what other people did, and I saw that quite a few added panko crumbs to the end, which personally I've never done before, nor have I had before, as I'm just a good old-fashioned battered and fried guy, and that's most of the places that I've gone to, story 2. Actually, all of them. I'm gonna give this a try just to see what it's like. We're gonna use tongs to dunk these cleaned up shroomies into the batter, and then half are going straight onto a parchment paper lined baking pan, and the other half are gonna get a toss in the panko crumbs before we put them on. You can be smart here, like I was eventually, and just put about a dozen of these at a time into the batter and give them a mix to coat, which is going to really speed things up. Frying time. Remember to use a deep pot to fill it with oil no more than halfway full, and have several means of quickly extinguishing a potential grease fire within its arm's reach at all times. Now we want to get this to a little above 300 degrees of freedom heat units before we start. Also, watch your temps while you cook, because while we're not frying things with a lot of mass, our mushrooms will still bring the heat down a little when we put them in. Fry up your shroomies about half a dozen or so at a time, making sure that there is always over an inch of play between the oil and the rim of the pot, because remember, putting things into liquid displaces the liquid, and we don't want that going over the edge. That is very bad. And remember, these also cook fast, like maybe 2 minutes at the longest for the larger ones of these shrooms. Use a kitchen spider to pull them out and put them onto a paper towel lined wire rack to cool for a bit before we give them a bit of seasoning. Seasoning, again, is also very easy. Put your shroomies into a bowl once they've had a chance to cool off a bit, put a few shakes of adobo in the bowl, and give that bowl a quick tossing. If you don't have adobo, use a bit of Lawry's. If you don't have Lawry's, use a couple shakes of garlic and onion powder each. If you don't have any of those, leave. Get out. Now. Kill the heat on your oil, cover the pot, and go to the store to get some spices. And that's literally it. You're done. Personally, between the two, I like the non-breaded version of these as they're easier to snack on, and I really wish I hadn't over-seasoned mine. You can do either of these if you'd like, and you can get my full recipe over at patreon.com/charlatanwonder, where we've discounted the yearly rate as low as it'll go, and anyone who pledges yearly at the recipe tier or higher gets their own patron apron, just like mine, as a free gift made by me and shipped by me to you personally. Now let's take a look at Hello Neighbor 2. And now that we've had a bit of a break, let's get into Hello Neighbor 2. The second major installment in the Hello Neighbor series is a massive improvement over literally everything from the first game. The graphics are much better, the physics and collision are drastically improved, and while I did have the occasional issue with mantling certain ledges, it wasn't anywhere near on the level of the last game. Oh yeah, and there's an actual mantling feature now. And the puzzles are now actual puzzles that you can solve with intuition and the context clues around the area, instead of just brute forcing every object with every other object. The plot's also a bit more coherent, and through just visual reference alone, you get an idea of what's going on. I know I didn't talk about the plot in the first game very much, but that was not only from me tapping out, but also because unless you're willing to read a bunch of supplementary material, Hello Neighbor the First is about as clear as a brick wall. Here we've got something though. Hello Neighbor 2 takes place a good bit of time after the events of the first game, where the player character, an investigative journalist, has come to Raven Brooks to figure out what the heck happened with that Mr. Peterson guy. The neighbor. People aren't really open to his questioning though. It's up for you to follow leads and figure out what exactly happened here all those years ago and why people aren't so eager to talk about it. The neighborhood isn't just a street with 2 enterable houses anymore. It's a whole neighborhood with things to explore and non-story missions and collectibles. There's a good reason to explore, because while you won't exactly be gaining levels or anything like that, and most of the tools you need will be found in the areas you need to use them, and also this equipment rack here, which I am extremely appreciative of. Oh, and speaking of stuff you're going to be using, you no longer have a heavily limited inventory, and not only do items take up much less of your field of view, but you can also outright put away or hide items times when you need to see better. Wait, I was talking about something else. Yeah, right. Finding secret tapes and the like through the neighborhood helps you get a hint at what's really going on. I guess it goes to show how much Eerie Guest hustled hard to improve Hello Neighbor. When you aren't wandering around the neighborhood looking for secret tapes and what have you, you're going to go from one location to another, figuring out the secret of each place to get a little closer to the truth of what happened at Raven Brooks. This is, I think, the best possible way to expand on the Hello Neighbor formula that I at least can possibly think of. Eerie Guest, formerly Dynamic Pixels, who made the first game, got rebranded after being bought out by TinyBuild, did an amazing job expanding upon Hello Neighbor. Each location is a puzzle that you must solve with hints and lore bits along the way. I'll admit some areas are better than others, and you might notice that you're doing some very similar puzzles from area to area, but this is like night and day compared to Hello Neighbor's house in the first game. The Hunter's house was easily my least favorite, with not only the really cramped spacing, meaning the Hunter can basically hear you everywhere, but it doesn't let you solve the final puzzle until you've done all the sub-puzzles, which sucks if you wanted to try getting all but one and then just going through the different combos to get the last digit. Oh yeah, and sometimes the Hunter's like AI pathing gets weird, and I crashed 4 times in 30 minutes here. This was the only place I had issues with either of those things though. Also, never mind everyone else in the neighborhood, the Hunter is the most threatening resident of Raven Brooks, not just for the gun, but because once he catches you, he resists the urge to pummel you. This is not this dude's first time performing a citizen's arrest. To contrast this, I think my favorites was the mayor's house right after it, which is a much more spacious area and has plenty of potential alternate paths to get to certain puzzle pieces, and I got a kick that certain puzzles required me to make a lot of noise, which meant I had to have a really good idea of where the mayor was when I attempted them. If anything, Hello Neighbor 2 shows that not only is Eerie Guest a capable developer, but they're also able to grow and improve if they're just given the time and resources to do so. Unfortunately, despite how much of a night and day improvement Hello Neighbor 2 is over the first game, it just wasn't compelling enough for me to want to keep playing this game if not for making this video. Make no mistake, I certainly finished this one, but I also didn't get too into the DLCs or feel any urge to try and go for alternate endings. It's a drastic improvement on what is a promising formula though. However, it's just not quite refined enough for me to go, yeah, I'd totally play this on my downtime. I think part of it is that it's just directly connected to the previous game. Hell, I'd go as far to say that the worst thing Hello Neighbor 2 has going for it is that it's Hello Neighbor 2. If this was the first game in the series with Hello Neighbor as we know it being called, say, Alpha 5, that'd make, in what is reality, Hello Neighbor 2, a much stronger debut for the series than the previous game. But we'll talk about all those other games in a sec. It's not just these 2 mainline games here. And in spite of its detractors, and on top of the massive improvements Hello Neighbor 2 has, the ongoing support for this game should absolutely not go unnoticed. If anything, Dynamic Pixels / Eerie Guest's best quality is that in spite of everything, they support their games, not just with patches, but with updates well after the game's launch. There's been a bunch of major patches since launch, with the most recent and most major being Patch 9, which added a whole new area to the game for free. Considering some of the other entries in the labyrinth of Mascot Horror I've got to go through, I am extremely appreciative of how these devs just will not quit, no matter how badly people clown on their games. Heck, I am part of that people. There's some devs who we're going to go over a little bit later in this experiment that certainly don't take care of their games all that well, and aside from some day one stuff, just dump their games onto Steam and move on to the next one. You really have to respect Eerie Guest's dedication. Before we wrap up on this series, we may as well go over what's apparent. There are a lot of Hello Neighbor things. Never mind the books and the show, with the exceptions of 2020 because, you know. And this year so far, 2024, for those of you coming here from the future, there has been a Hello Neighbor release every year since the first game released in 1.0 back in 2017. That's a lot. Sure, but some of it is more like the playable teaser that is sometimes referred to as Hello Guest or the mobile game. That's still an insane amount of turnaround, early access or not. Ironically, despite all the Hello Neighbor stuff out there, I can't help but notice that the franchise doesn't quite have the kind of mainstream appeal that other Mascot Horror series have. I have never seen a Hello Neighbor plushie of obvious bootleg quality at any of the malls I've been to, and I've never seen a shirt at Target or Hot Topic who, for the latter, have an insane amount of Five Nights at Freddy's stuff. Heck, I don't even see any of the books carried at my local booksellers, major chain or otherwise. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Hello Neighbor 2 is more popular over in Russia, where Dynamic Pixel / Eerie Guest is originally from, or maybe just every mall and big box store I've ever been to are just the ones that don't carry the stuff. And that's a little surprising considering how much Hello Neighbor there is. It just can't gain traction like other franchises do. And heck, I have seen Choo Choo Charles plushies a couple months after the game came out at my local candy shop of all places. Perhaps that can be explained by a couple things. One, the games are most commonly associated with being very low quality, with the debut game being utterly mangled by critics when it first came out, leading to the games having a bit of a bad reputation. Now that I've played the game myself a while back when I saw a lot of other critiques about it, it seems like people are just looking for a reason to beat up on the game, which, I can kind of see where it's warranted, but it kind of feels like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy personally. And for another, the games are scattershot. A few are dedicated PC and maybe console games, but then there's a mobile game, there's Hello Engineer, which as far as I can tell was just Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts with the Hello Neighbor universe for some reason, and that one's a Google Stadia exclusive, so the best I can do is guess because there's no way for me to really play that anymore. Okay, let's wrap it up. I'll say that Hello Neighbor is a great concept for a game that just needs to be refined. The first game's final build lost its way, and there's been a slew of stuff that seems more inclined to try and make it a big Mascot Horror franchise as opposed to a solid series of games. But when Eerie Guest finally got a chance to take their time and put out the second major game in the series, well, it wasn't a great game, it was still a good game, and more importantly, shows how much they've grown as developers and that they're capable of making a great game. If I had to make a suggestion to the team, it'd be just slow down a bit. Breathe. Hello Neighbor 1 and 2 though, I just can't recommend these to you, especially not at the prices they're asking for these games. Think of how many Abermores you can get for this. What I can recommend, however, is that you go on and check out all the specials we've got going on for Halloween in July. There's all sorts of cool stuff that comes with membership at patreon.com/charlatanwonder, such as early access to videos, Discord access, full recipes for the cooking segments, and more. And since we're celebrating Halloween in July, I've discounted that yearly subscription as low as Patreon will let me, and anyone who pledges yearly gets a free iron-on patch made by yours truly, and anyone who supports me and the channel for the year at the $5 recipe tier or higher will get their own patron apron just like mine, which I also make myself because, once again, I just am not a fan of merch fulfillment companies, and I'm a big boy who knows how to go to the post office by himself and mail things. I just actually like making these on my own. They feel more special when I do that. And that'll do us for today. Stay tuned for next week when we'll cover a Mascot Horror game that I was surprisingly really into. Enough to where instead of making a single video on the whole series, I'm going to make videos on each of the games. For now though, let's sign off. Remember that no matter what you do, be it drawing, designing clothes, or making pen and paper games, what you do is not content. It is art. Content is a word that has been twisted into meaning a means to grind up all your skills, your passions, and your aspirations into a gray sludge whose only purpose is to make a line go up for somebody else's benefit. Your art is a reflection of you by the very nature of its creation, and in no way do you deserve to be reduced to content. Fight against the contentification for everything by fighting for your art, because you're worth it. Until then, stay saucy, everyone.
So, saucy boy, was this your plan the whole time? You're gonna loaf on the aprons?
No toe beans in sight?
Just loaf? I gotta fold these. Really, please, let me fold them. I know you were upset earlier. What about a scritch? A pet. You're willing to let me pet you as long as you get to sit on your likeness? I gotta get you off, man. I need to get these folded. People are expecting these. These are the people that help you get extra snacks. You like snacks? Come on, I'm gonna... You will not give an inch. You're supposed to be my little helper. Please. Just let... I don't want to, like, force you off, but... Go. Oh, I got him up. Oh no, we're back to where we were before. Oh boy. You know, come on. I don't want to push too hard. I don't want to pick you up, because no good can come from, like, picking you up. I need to fold these. They won't fit in the mailer like this. Someone might be allergic to cats. Alright, I gotta... Ugh. Don't look at me like you're guilty.